time of reckoning, policy and retaliation in the 1980s bomb. The 1980s marked a profound shift in American foreign policy, pivoting from the massive Cold War calculations of troop movements and nuclear arsenals toward a new, asymmetric threat, state-sponsored terrorism. This era provided a contrasting set of answers to a single, urgent question: how should the United States respond when major provocation strikes at its personnel overseas? Our focus today is on two seminal events from this decade: the devastating Beirut barracks bombing of 1983 and the punitive Libya raid of 1986. The crisis in Beirut, provocation and retreat, 1983. The context for the Beirut attack was the turbulent Lebanese civil war. In 1982, the U.S. deployed a multinational force, MNF, primarily U.S. Marines, as peacekeepers to oversee the withdrawal of Palestinian forces. Their initial mandate was one of neutrality and stabilization. However, the Marines' role quickly blurred. As the U.S. government began providing support to the Christian-dominated Lebanese government and U.S. naval guns shelled Syrian-backed militias, the peacekeepers were increasingly perceived not as neutral observers, but as active combatants supporting one faction in a complex sectarian conflict. The initial warning came on April 18, 1983, when a suicide bomber destroyed the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, killing 63 people, including 17 Americans. But the full horror was yet to come. On the morning of October 23, 1983, a yellow Mercedes dump truck, overloaded with an estimated 12,000 pounds of military-grade explosives, bypassed meager security measures and slammed into the four-story headquarters of the 1st Battalion, 8th Marines near Beirut International Airport. The resulting blast was catastrophic. The building was instantly reduced to rubble. 241 American servicemen, 220 Marines, 18 sailors, and 3 soldiers were killed, representing the largest single-day loss of life for the U.S. Marine Corps since the Battle of Iwo Jima in 1945. Minutes later, a similar attack on a French paratrooper barracks killed 58 more French soldiers. Responsibility was claimed by a group called Islamic Jihad, later linked by intelligence to the nascent Hezbollah movement, acting under the direction of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The provocation was clear: a massive, coordinated, and devastating terrorist strike designed to expel Western forces. The expected military retaliation never came. President Ronald Reagan initially vowed to keep the Marines in Lebanon, but the sheer vulnerability of the forces, coupled with a lack of clear military objectives, paralyzed the administration. Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger strongly resisted military reprisals, fearing it would trigger a wider Middle Eastern war without achieving a political goal. The political action taken was not a strike, but a strategic reversal. In February 1984, Reagan ordered the withdrawal of the multinational force. For the sponsors of the attack, particularly Iran and Hezbollah, this lack of military response was interpreted as a victory for terrorism, a clear sign that a spectacular, high-casualty attack could break American resolve and dictate U.S. policy. This precedent taught radical groups a dangerous lesson about the power of asymmetric warfare. 2. The shift, retaliation as policy, 1986. The political lesson learned from Beirut haunted the Reagan administration. They were determined to establish a new policy that defined terrorism as an act of war, not merely a crime, and demanded a military response. This shift led directly to the confrontation with Muammar Gaddafi's Libya. Throughout the mid-1980s, Libya was viewed by the U.S. as a leading state sponsor of terrorism, using its vast oil wealth to fund operations across Europe and the Middle East. Relations were already tense, marked by naval skirmishes in the Gulf of Sidra. The specific, final provocation came on April 5, 1986. A terrorist bomb exploded at the La Belle discotheque in West Berlin, a nightclub popular with American servicemen. The blast killed 3 people, including 2 American soldiers, and injured over 200 others. Crucially, U.S. intelligence obtained exact, precise, and irrefutable evidence, including intercepted communications, definitively linking the bombing to the Libyan regime. The attack was a clear, direct challenge to American personnel and interests in Europe. This time, the policy machine was primed for retaliation. Unlike Beirut, President Reagan's response was swift and decisive. 10 days after the disco bombing, he ordered Operation El Dorado Canyon, a joint Air Force and Navy air strike against 5 targets in Libya, including terrorist training camps, airfields, and, most importantly, Gaddafi's personal residence and command center at the Azazia barracks in Tripoli. The operation itself was a masterpiece of planning and a logistical nightmare. Because key European allies like France and Spain denied overflight rights for the U.S. Air Force F-111 fighter bombers flying out of bases in the United Kingdom, the aircraft were forced to fly a massive 6,400-mile round trip, a grueling, 13-hour combat mission requiring multiple mid-air refuelings. The difficulty of the mission underscored the administration's determination to strike back, despite political isolation. The strikes inflicted significant damage on Libyan military assets and reportedly killed dozens of Libyan military and government officials. Crucially, the strike was an unmistakable, punitive act of state-on-state military retaliation directly connected to a terrorist act. 3. The legacy, a new counterterrorism paradigm. The contrasting responses of 1983 and 1986 forged the new American counterterrorism policy that would define the next 2 decades. The Beirut barracks bombing demonstrated the profound vulnerability of U.S. forces to decentralized, fanatical, asymmetric attacks. The policy outcome, withdrawal, was seen by many within the administration as an unacceptable capitulation that emboldened future attackers. It taught them the need for military intervention to be accompanied by clear, achievable political objectives, or not to intervene at all. The Libya raid marked the formal articulation of the Reagan doctrine against state-sponsored terrorism. By labeling the raid an act of self-defense under international law and striking directly at a state sponsor, the U.S. signaled a new willingness to use kinetic force as a deterrent and a punitive measure. The message was clear: if a nation harbors, funds, or directs attacks against U.S. citizens, it will be held accountable by military action. This precedent, of viewing a terrorist attack as a military provocation demanding a military response, would be codified in future policy documents and would become the bedrock upon which the entire global war on terror was ultimately constructed after the next, even greater, provocation, the attacks of September 11, 2001. The 1980s, therefore, taught the U.S. 2 critical, contradictory lessons about retaliation: that inaction in the face of terror can be misinterpreted as weakness, but that military force, however precise, must have a clear strategy behind it to achieve a lasting political objective. The legacy of Beirut and Libya is a blueprint for American action against global terrorism, a legacy still being debated today.